Wilson of Fort Myers was born to underage parents and given up for adoption. He grew up in the Tallahassee area before moving to Lee County. He has voluminous tattoos on his face, including stitches, a swastika, and one that reads, "Glory," in cursive. Wilson shares his name with the alter ego of the Marvel character Deadpool. Wilson's has been accused of 2 counts of first-degree murder, grand theft, battery, burglary, and petty theft. Weeks-long trial began June 1st, 2024 with jury selection and took place at the Lee County Courthouse in Fort Myers. According to prosecutor on the fateful night, he first strangled Christine Melton in her home after a drug-fueled sexual encounter with her, according to prosecutors. He then stole Melton's car and called his girlfriend, 41-year-old Melissa Montanez, using the victim's phone. He later went on to assault her, but she refused to enter the car. Wilson then came across Diana Ruiz, who was asking for directions in Cape Coral. He invited Ruiz into the car and strangled her and threw her out of the vehicle. He later returned and ran Ruiz over, until she looked like spaghetti, according to testimony from the trial. This case was about killing for the sake of the killing, Assistant State Attorney Andreas Gardner previously told the court. Strangulation is the epitome of life slipping through someone's hands.
When he arrives, he makes contact with Miss Montanez. It's not nice. He's trying to pull Miss Montanez into the car. Miss Montanez tries to fight him off. He gets out. A car rolls back. It's another car. Physical altercation takes place between him and Miss Montanez. Miss Montanez isn't anything but 5'2", weighs barely 100+ pounds, soaking wet. She's trying everything she can to fend him off. Comes a point in time when he punches her in the face. Blood flies everywhere. There's also a point in time when he holds her up against the wall. His hand, she can't move. We know is that Miss Ruiz had been strangled. And what we also know is that she died as a result of blunt force trauma because of the multiple rib fractures. And if you want to believe what Mr. Wilson told law enforcement, was that he had driven over her repeatedly and tried to make her look like spaghetti. Now, Ms. Ruiz's body wasn't found until a couple days later. But what we know is that when she was missing, there was a frantic search for her that was being conducted. Okay? And after that search was being conducted, Ms. Melton, her search was being conducted right around the same time. Mr. Wilson leaves Ms. Ruiz on that empty lot, underneath those shrubs, underneath that tree. Gets back in that Nissan Versa. He leaves. He goes back across the bridge, and he goes to a place called Joe's Crab Shack, which conveniently enough is just right across the street from Mia's spa. Law enforcement gets there. And the reason why he goes to Joe's Crab Shack is because he and Melissa Montanez were communicating. She was trying to get him to a particular location so that way law enforcement could make an arrest. So when he arrives at Joe's Crab Shack, you're also going to learn that law enforcement gets in contact with him there. He plays dumb. He has absolutely no idea as to why he's being asked about any type of battery. He doesn't know why about anything. But what he does do is he does manage to get away from the officer who had tried to go ahead and block him in. He wasn't snaking around. So he gets back into stays in his car, and then he backs out and leaves Joe's Crab Shack's parking lot. You all know where he headed there. He heads to Mateo's Graphics. He needs to get out of town. And now we're back to where we began. At Mateo's Graphics, when he leaves, before law enforcement gets there to search that building, he proceeds to go off into a neighborhood behind Mateo's Graphics. He goes to place Northeast First Avenue, which is actually the residence of a young couple by the name of Fanny Amlin. And the Amlins, conveniently enough, had just left their house the day before to go to Ohio. It was empty. He'd broken in through the back, helped himself to some food, helped himself to some clothes, helped himself to some drink. While he was there, he needed help. He calls his dad. I need to get out of town. I need your help. Send me an Uber. While that was happening, law enforcement is conducting an investigation. They knew who he was. They were researching, trying to figure out who his next point of contact would be. They'd already reached out to his dad. They needed to know where his whereabouts are. Dad tells them, he's conflicted. It's his son, right? But when he starts describing what he had done, he describes it in such a way where he's bragging. He wants his dad to feel that excitement. It made his dad sick. His dad gets the address, tells him, I'm going to send you an Uber, passes that information along to the marshals. Marshals descend on that particular location. Mr. Kent Amlin and Miss Fanny Amlin are contacted and asked, hey, is this guy supposed to be in your residence? They're like, absolutely not. You give us permission to go in? Absolutely. His dad is encouraging Mr. Wilson to come outside. He finally does, subsequently arrested.
Wilson then approached a friend and told him about the murder and that he needed bus or plane ticket to escape out of town.
On an occasion when you came into contact with Mr. Wilson,
Yes.
would you please describe for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury how that came about?
Wade came in a black car. He backed up to one of the buildings on the property there, and he came up to my truck, my vehicle, when I was on the property, and I was with a client at that time, so I told him to give me a moment, and I'll be right with him. And once I went into the building, he was there trying to get a plane ticket or a bus ticket or whatever he could from me to leave town.
Now, when you saw Mr. Wilson, could you please describe for us what he was wearing at that time?
He was wearing sweatpants only, no shoes, no shirt. He was bloody, and he was missing a couple of teeth.
Could you please describe for ladies and gentlemen of the jury what his demeanor was?
His demeanor was frantic, in a rush to leave as quickly as he could, because he had just done something horrific and killed people.
When he was speaking to you and asking you for your assistance, did that give you any cause for concern?
Not right away. And once I took a look at him again started to believe what he was saying.
And what exactly was he saying to you?
He said he killed people and he rolled up someone in a carpet or bedding or whatever it was, and that he also needed to get out of town. He needed a plane ticket and a bus ticket or anything he could.
So was he frantically asking you for assistance?
Yes.
Stephanie Sailors, the best friend of Christine Melton, sobbed, gasped, and dried tears as she testified in the capital murder trial for the accused killer.
Do you have any specific reason the two of you chose the Buddha on that night?
There was live music there that night, so we wanted to go see a band play.
When you got there, what was just sort of the general environment of the bar?
It wasn't overly crowded. There was, a decent amount of people there that night, dancing, drinking, nothing out of the ordinary from a typical bar.
Was there a band playing?
Yes.
Now, were you friendly and did you talk to other people that were there?
Yeah, we socialized quite a bit. There's a couple of different bars in the main bar, and we were down at one bar, we danced, we got drinks at other bars, we talked to the people that were there. Pretty standard going out night.
Now, obviously you're drinking and listening to music this entire time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we had been drinking pretty heavily that night.
And is that why you chose to get an Uber?
Yes, yeah, we both knew we were going to be drinking, so we didn't want to be driving at all.
Now, while you were there, did someone approach you?
Yeah, towards the end of the night, as we were walking up to the upstairs bar, somebody jumped out in front of me, kind of just like to get my attention, and said, "Hey, who's your friend?" And gestured towards Christine. He seemed friendly and introduced himself, and I grabbed Christine and said, "Hey, this guy wants to meet you."
What was his demeanor?
Friendly, charming.
Is there any red flags that popped up when you were talking to him?
No.
How did he introduce himself to you?
At that point, he introduced himself as JR.
Do you see JR sitting in the courtroom today?
Yes.
Would you please point to him and identify an article of clothing that he's wearing?
Right there, in a bright blue suit.
Let the record reflect that the witness has identified the defendant.
Okay.
Now, has his appearance changed since the time that you met him?
Yes, he has a lot more tattoos on his face. He did not have any facial tattoos
May
the
I
night
approach
we
a
met
witness?
him.
What happened when you got back to Christine's home?
When we got back to Christine's home, the three of us went into her house, and I know Christine and I had this sense of relief that we had made it home, that we got home, safely, and, it was winding down. I remember sitting on the couch and taking my shoes off. I remember Christine standing in the kitchen getting something to drink. And I remember telling her, I had to go home because I had to go to work the next day and take my son to school.
Now, where was your son staying that night?
He was with my mom.
And did you and your son live with your mom?
Yeah, we lived with her at the time.
Now, about what time did you leave to go home so that you could take your son to school and go to work?
About 6 o'clock.
Now, prior to leaving, did everything seem fine?
Yeah, it did. And I remember telling Christine, I have to go home, I have to go to work. And she was like, okay. She hugged me and kissed me goodbye and said, "I'll talk to you tomorrow."
Medical examiner took the stand to explain the gruesome injuries Christine Melton suffered in her final moment.
Just looking externally, you can see that She had a large number of bruises on her body, on her face, a swollen eye, contusions around the eye, contusions around the mouth. She had bruising all over her torso, all over her arms. So it was suggested that she had blunt trauma. And being a young person, you always wonder if whether or not that could be, the cause of a person's death. And so similar to the injuries we describe here, when Noelle did the internal examination, you can see that there was a significant amount of hemorrhaging on both sides of the neck, within both, skeletal muscles of the neck. She also had bruising in her scalp, all over her scalp, as well as within the subscalp muscles. So again, showing significant blunt force trauma. Also, if I can continue, what was notable about this case was when she did the internal examination, she also saw that there was contusions of her internal organs as well. So forces that were directed to the outside of the body also went inward. And so she had bruising or contusions of the lungs. She had a contusion of the liver. She also had contusions on the back of her bladder, as well as contusions to her colon, indicating that there was a significant force to the abdomen as well.
Now, as a result of having observed the external as well as the internal examination of Ms. Melton, did you also conduct an examination of her brain?
I did, yes.
Okay. And what did that examination reveal to you?
Sure. I mean, it was a structurally normal brain, so there wasn't anything congenitally wrong, any brain masses or anything that would cause a person to die. But the interesting thing that I did see was the brain was swollen, or edematous, and that to me fits with the injuries you observe on her scalp and around her head. It suggests that there was an underlying concussive trauma, because a brain can swell if a person is deprived of oxygen, but it needs time to have that process to occur. So if a person, let's say, you cut off oxygen or blood flow to a person's brain, and then you let them recover, that brain will swell. But if a person dies from injuries, and in this case, more than likely, she was asphyxiated from strangulation, she would have died, not allowing the brain to swell because of that process. And so it suggests to me that that swelling occurred prior to that, probably from concussive trauma to her head.
And did you ultimately concur with the doctor as it relates to her findings that Ms. Melton died as a result of asphyxiation?
Yes.
He later explained injuries done to the body of Diane Ruiz as well. She had multiple fractured bone and severe bruising.
What injuries did you note, if any, on the external examination of Ms. Diana Ruiz?
Sure. Most notably, so she was in the stages of putrefactive decomposition. So her tissues were being decomposed and degrading. She had some evidence of animal or scavenging activity on her body as well. And so portions of her ears and nose were removed already, most likely by avian scavengers. But I could see externally, first and foremost, that she had fracturing of the nasal bone. She also had a laceration underneath her left breast. She also had bruising or hemorrhaging in the skin on both sides of the left and right sides of the body.
Okay. Was that the extent of the external injuries that you observed? On
the most significant external. There was, of course, a lot of significant internal injuries.
And did you document all these
Well,
by way of
I apologize. She also had, what I didn't talk about was bruising on the back of her left forearm, bruising on the back of her left hand. I can also see that she had a fracture of the fourth finger, the proximal part of the fourth finger, and she also had some bruising on her right arm as well.
After the murders, Wilson called his biological father several times, confessing to the crimes in gruesome detail. After initially dismissing Wilson's calls and attributing the admissions to Wilson being a good storyteller, Stephen Testaseca, 46, contacted police.
Did he end up calling you later that evening?
Yes, ma'am.
And what did he tell you in that call that evening?
The final call?
Nope, the call before the final call.
He just told me, he did something. There was 2 people gone that would not be back. He said, I'm a killer. You know, I just told him to call me back. I just thought it was another story, you know.
So at this point, when he says that there were two people that wouldn't be with us and that he was a killer, did you put a lot of weight into that?
No, ma'am.
Did you think he was just telling you a story?
He's a good storyteller.
So did he then call you back a third time?
Yes, ma'am.
What time did he call you back?
It was around 10 o'clock.
I want to go back to that dinner time call. When he talked about these two people who were no longer with us and that he was a killer, did he show any type of remorse?
No, ma'am.
So let's go now to the 10 o'clock call. Again, your wife knew about kind of what was going on during that day.
Yes, ma'am.
And when he called back at 10, did he go into more details about what he had told you earlier?
Yes, ma'am.
So let's start with the first girl. If you could tell the jurors, what did he tell you?
He just said he met a girl at a bar. They went back to her house, hung out for a little bit, and then she fell asleep.
What did he say happened after she fell asleep?
He said he got on top of her and choked her.
What name did he call her? Did he refer to her in a derogatory term?
He said, I choked that.
Okay. And what did he say he did after he choked her?
He said he stayed in the house for a little while, and then he rolled her up and was going to try to put her in her trunk, but he couldn't lift her.
Did he say why he was unable to put her in her trunk?
He said that he felt like rigor mortis had started to set in.
And does rigor mortis make your body stiff? You didn't know?
I think so.
So he just told you that that was the reason that he couldn't lift her and get her into her trunk?
Yes, ma'am.
And when he said her trunk, it was the trunk of her car he was going to put her in?
Yes, ma'am.
So what did he tell you he did when he couldn't get her body into her own trunk?
He left her there and took her car.
What did he say about the second girl?
He said he saw her walking down the street and stopped and asked her for directions. And she got in the car with him.
What did he say happened once she got in the car with him?
He said he reached over and choked her.
And did he tell you that he choked her while he was driving?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, what did he say happened after he choked her?
He said he was looking for a place to put her body.
Did he find a place where he eventually dumped her body?
Yes, ma'am.
What did he tell you about the situation when he got to the place where he was going to dump her body?
He said that he pulled her out of the car and realized that she was still breathing.
So what did he tell you he did when he realized she's still breathing?
He said he got back in the car and ran her over until she looked like spaghetti.
As he's telling you all these things, what's his demeanor as he's telling you?
He was excited.
When you say excited, what do you mean by that?
I felt like he was wanting me to feel the way he felt about it.
Did he seem proud of it?
Yes.
Did he seem to show any kind of remorse?
No, ma'am.
And was he able to go into great detail about both of these ladies' deaths?
Yes, ma'am.
The second girl that he killed and left in this lot, did he think that she would be found?
No, ma'am.
He seemed to think he did a good job hiding her body.
Yes, ma'am.
Wilson's attorneys claimed that he suffered brain damage from drug addiction and even had abandonment issues as his biological parents had given him up for adoption. Since the case was already in penalty phase, the defense put on evidence of mitigating factors to support leniency in sentencing. For this, the defense brought two witnesses who testified about mental condition of defendant.
So throughout his younger years, up through puberty, he was functioning fine. He was active in sports. He was part of the family.
He went to church.
He went to church on a regular basis. For the most,
How was he as a student?
He was a good student.
All right, what happened after puberty?
So they found that there was a dramatic change that occurred in puberty. His mental health changed. His behavior changed. He became reclusive, paranoid, mood swings, very aberrant behavior. He would sometimes think that there are people aliens out to get him. Very concerned about the family, the parents, and he became very disruptive and very, very difficult to manage.
Did he start experimenting with controlled substances?
Yes.
What type of help did the family try and get for Wade Wilson when they first started noticing these behaviors?
So they tried to get mental health treatment. They sought out psychologists. Mr. Wilson was not cooperative and very difficult in terms of trying to get him the help that they sought. And unfortunately, it was only through the police, when his behavior became destructive, that intervention finally occurred.
Do you have an opportunity to have him perform any testing like Dr. Eisenstein had described?
Yeah, I mean, as a psychiatrist, I don't do a lot of testing, but I was tutored in the administration of various so-called personality tests. I say so-called because although they're called personality tests, the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory and the Personality Assessment Inventory, they're really tests of major mental illness, tests of psychopathology. And I asked Ms. Perez to administer one, to watch him, basically just giving him the piece of paper, say, read the instructions and answer the questions. And she had done that, and I got that score, that test back and scored it. And then I asked him, which he did, to do the personality assessment inventory. So we had two psychological tests which were administered in the presence of either Ms. Perez or myself, and which were subsequently scored.
And what did his scores indicate to you?
His scores indicated that he was non-compliant, that he answered the questions, that's kind of partial compliance, but that he invalidated each test by exaggerating symptoms that most people do not have, or most people do not have to that same degree. So, in effect, he said, wow, I've got every symptom in the book. And of course, every symptom in the book is many too many symptoms. Even people who are seriously ill only have some symptoms.
So, did you make any diagnosis or determinations based upon the information that you had?
Yeah, my diagnosis and belief is that Mr. Wilson has some kind of psychotic disorder. Sadly, because he was not particularly forthcoming with me, I can't characterize it very well. Generally, when I testify, I have more information both from the evaluee, both from the defendant in a case like this, and I have more information from prior hospital records, from Baker Act hospitalizations, from other psychiatric hospitalizations, and I can characterize that disorder pretty well. Here we've heard about mood swings that could suggest bipolar disorder. We heard about a diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder in the JO records. There's a good study going back to really my time in medical school called The Stages of Mania, which says, 1972 was the date of the study, you can't distinguish acutely between schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and schizoaffective disorder. So I don't know exactly what Mr. Wilson has, but I think it is very significant.
How about the tattoos on his face?
Well, I mean, they're disturbing and they're disfiguring, I think, but I'm an old guy. I mean, there are some people who like skin decoration, but I would say most people would be off-put by those tattoos.
All right. Did you see a picture, booking photo of Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Okay. And he didn't have any of those tattoos on his face?
None.
State's witness rebutted the claim of defense, blaming it all on mental health.
Does Mr. Wilson have a long history of substance abuse?
He does.
Now, when we're talking about substance use, you'd also come up with a slide reflecting your concerns as it relates to Mr. Wilson's seeking of substance, using of substance. Is that right?
Correct.
And why is it of concern to you as it relates to Mr. Wilson's mental health?
Well, because she knows that she first started noticing changes in his behavior around 13. That's in her note. Mr. Wilson, in my interview, told me he was a drug addict since he was 13. As I told you before, parents are oftentimes the last one to know that the kid is using. And so while the mother, I believe that she noticed these behavior changes, and then when he gets into school, he starts getting into trouble. What's he get in trouble for? Selling drugs. I think if you wanted to look at the more logical explanation, is, in my professional opinion, is it more likely that this is an emerging schizophrenia or an emerging bipolar disorder, or is this the effects of the drug use? In my professional opinion, you're seeing the effects of the drug use. And the drugs that he used, talks about cocaine, mushrooms, acid, meth, at various points in his life. So that all of these drugs can affect cognitive functioning, mental status, hallucinations, delusions.
Florida juries were required to vote unanimously for a death sentence recommendation until April 2023, when Governor Ron DeSantis lowered the threshold by signing into law a bill allowing juries to recommend death with as few as 8 votes. During the penalty phase of the trial, jurors had the option of recommending life in prison without parole or death. On June 25, 2024, the jury in Wilson's trial recommended he receive the death penalty for each of the murders. The jury took only 9 hours to come to this verdict.
We, the jury, finds as follows as to the defendant, Wade Wilson, in this case. As to count 1, first-degree murder, Christine Milton. We, the jury, unanimously find that the state has established beyond a reasonable doubt that Wade Wilson was previously convicted of a felony and under sentence of imprisonment or placed on community control or on felony probation. Yes. We, the jury, find unanimously that the state has established beyond a reasonable doubt that Wade Wilson was previously convicted of another capital felony or of a felony involving the use of threat of violence to the person. Yes. We, the jury, unanimously find that the state has established beyond a reasonable doubt that the first-degree murder was especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel. Yes. We, the jury, unanimously find that the state has established beyond a reasonable doubt that the first-degree murder was committed in a cold, calculated, and premeditated manner without any pretense of moral or legal justification. We, the jury, unanimously found the state proved 1 or more aggravating factors. Each of us has considered whether 1 or more mitigating circumstances exist. Each of us has weighed whether the proven aggravating factors are sufficient and whether the proven aggravating factors outweigh any proven mitigating circumstances. We have further considered whether Wade Wilson should be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole or death. We, the jury, find by a vote of 9-3 that Wade Wilson should be sentenced to death.
After considering aggravating and mitigating circumstances, the jury voted for death, 9-3 in Melton's murder and 10-2 in Ruiz's murder.
And Ruiz. We, the jury, unanimously find that the state has established beyond a reasonable doubt the existence of aggravating factors. We, the jury, unanimously find that the state has established beyond a reasonable doubt that Wade Wilson was previously convicted of a felony and under sentence of imprisonment or placed on community control or on felony probation. Yes. We, the jury, unanimously find that the state has established beyond a reasonable doubt that Wade Wilson was previously convicted of another capital felony or of a felony involving the use of threat of violence to the person. Yes. We, the jury, unanimously find that the state has established beyond a reasonable doubt that the first-degree murder was especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel? Yes. We, the jury, unanimously find that the state has established beyond a reasonable doubt that the first-degree murder was committed in a cold, calculated, and premeditated manner without any pretense of moral or legal justification. Yes. If fewer than 8 jurors vote for the death penalty, your recommendation must be for a penalty of life in prison without the possibility of parole. If 8 or more jurors vote for the death penalty, your recommendation must be for the death penalty. We, the jury, unanimously found the state proved one or more aggravating factors. Each of us has considered whether one or more mitigating circumstances exist. Each of us has weighed whether the proven aggravating factors are sufficient and whether the proven aggravating factors outweigh any proven mitigating circumstances. We have further considered whether Wade Wilson should be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole or death. We, the jury, find by a vote of 10-2 that Wade Wilson should be sentenced to death.
It was now up to Judge Thompson to ultimately decide whether Wilson will serve life imprisonment or will be sentenced to death. Judge Nicholas Thompson agreed with the jury's recommendation and imposed 2 death sentences on Wilson, 1 for each murder.
Once I conclude. So in the state of Florida versus Wade Stephen Wilson, case number 19 CF 568, the court will read aloud the portion of the sentencing order related to the sentencing circumstances and proportionality. In evaluating the aggravating and mitigating factors, the court does not engage in a mere counting procedure, but instead makes a reasoned judgment based on the totality of the circumstances. In reaching this decision, the court is mindful that because death is a unique punishment in its finality, its application is reserved only for those cases where the most aggravating and least mitigating circumstances exist. The law never requires the imposition of a death sentence. In this case, the totality of the circumstances indicates the defendant, with premeditation, beat and strangled Christine Melton in her home before stealing her vehicle and driving to meet his girlfriend, Melissa Montanez. After Montanez refused to get into the car with him, the defendant battered her in broad daylight. The defendant told law enforcement, when Ms. Montanez managed to flee from the defendant, he fled the scene and drove back to Cape Coral, where he decided that he would murder another person. He saw Diane Ruiz walking to work and pulled over, pretending to ask for directions. She got into the car to provide directions, but the defendant strangled her when she tried to exit. He then drove to an empty lot, strangling her into unconsciousness at least one additional time on the way there. When she tried to flee from the car, he drove over her at least one time, inflicting mortal injuries to her spine, ribs, and neck. The evidence showed that both murders were heinous, atrocious, and cruel, and that the second murder was cold, calculated, and premeditated. The defendant inflicted serious physical and emotional pain to the victims. Moreover, the defendant committed the murders while on probation for prior felony convictions, and he committed 2 first-degree murders contemporaneously with each other and with grand theft of a motor vehicle, battery, and burglary of a dwelling. There were no statutory mitigating circumstances that were established, but the court considered the non-statutory mitigating circumstances presented by the defendant. Out of 13 enumerated non-statutory mitigating factors, the court found that 10 had been established. Out of those established, 6 were given little weight. The totality of the mitigating circumstances indicates that the defendant suffers from drug use from a young age, along with undiagnosed and untreated mental health issues of some kind. He felt abandoned by his biological parents, but had a devoted adoptive family who raised him in a supportive and loving environment. Defendant did not resist law enforcement when arrested and confessed fully to both murders. The court has further considered giving great weight to the advisory verdict of the jury. who recommended that the death penalty be imposed by a vote of 9-3 on count 1 for the murder of Christine Melton and a vote of 10-2 on count 4 for the murder of Diane Ruiz. The court recognizes that there is no mathematical formula for considering the aggravating and mitigating factors. It is not enough to weigh the number of aggravators against the number of mitigators. The court carefully considered the nature and quality of each aggravator and mitigator. Having reviewed all of the aggravating factors proven beyond a reasonable doubt and all of the mitigating circumstances reasonably established by the evidence, the court finds that the aggravating factors greatly outweigh mitigating circumstances. Given the facts of the case, nothing in defendant's background or mental state would suggest that a death sentence is inappropriate. This court's review of other reported capital cases has led the court to conclude that the death penalty is not disproportionate in this case. Under the totality of the circumstances and evidence, the court finds no basis to override the jury's verdict. The totality of the circumstances warrants that the defendant, Wade Stephen Wilson, be sentenced to death for each count of first-degree murder. Accordingly, it is ordered and adjudged that the defendant, Wade Stephen Wilson, be sentenced as follows. Count 1, first-degree murder of Christine Melton. The defendant is hereby sentenced to death. Count 2, grand theft of a motor vehicle. The defendant is sentenced to 5 years imprisonment in the Florida Department of Corrections. Count 3, battery. The defendant is hereby sentenced to 364 days in the Lee County Jail. Count 4, first-degree murder of Diane Ruiz. The defendant is hereby sentenced to death. Count 5, the burglary of a dwelling. The defendant is hereby sentenced to 15 years imprisonment in the Florida Department of Corrections. Count 6, petty theft. The defendant is hereby sentenced to 364 days in the Lee County Jail. The defendant is given credit for all time served on this case on all counts. All counts are to run concurrent with each other, meaning at the same time. All statutorily mandated fines, fees, and costs as announced on the record are imposed, and the defendant is committed to the custody of the Department of Corrections for execution of this sentence as provided by law. The defendant is hereby notified that these convictions and sentences are subject to automatic review by the Florida Supreme Court.